do that. Make sure we get some of that.
Yeah, and you can come and operate this one whenever you want.
I will. Two
Okay.
cameras, A and B. Marker?
Marker.
That's not it.
It's not what?
What?
No. I meant the frame on top.
No, I know.
Brian? Call it down.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. In modernity, in the modern age of Western culture, out of my flow.
No. So let's just let's jump ahead. I think we've got that. So let's set up what Heidegger's project was and how radical he was in overturning what this Western tradition that you've described until now. Because we're going to get back into the history of being in more depth later. So we don't need to get into the way Christians and gods and all that kind of stuff yet. So if you could just set up again and remember all this we have, so it's just there's no pressure. Who was Martin Heidegger? Why was he so important? Why was he so radical? What did he do that broke from everything that you've been describing?
Martin Heidegger was a 20th century German philosopher. He was involved in a movement in philosophy known as Phenomenology, which was very different than, in a lot of respects, from the philosophical tradition we've been talking about. One of the elements of Phenomenology was proceeding not from an analysis of ideas. One of the features of Phenomenology was that instead of proceeding from an analysis of ideas and concepts, it began with a very rich description of our experience of the world. And as Heidegger engaged in this sort of description, he discovered that there were all sorts of features of our way of being in the world which are very poorly grasped by concepts and ideas, if they're grasped at all. And that if you try to put them back together using ideas and concepts, you distort them and disguise them and cover up what's really going on. And I think most people grasp this idea very intuitively. If you take something like love, which plays such a central role in our lives, and try to explain the theory of it or unpack the concept of love, you very quickly realize that we're completely missing the most important features of it. And that's why we have thousands of years of poets, each trying to describe love and talk about love, and none of them gives us a concept of it. None of them gives us a theory of it, but all of them give us some insight into the experience of love.
So it's because Heidegger doesn't just do this though with concepts that we all agree are, not theorizable, but he does it even with basic objects. He says that we have been ignoring a way of being of things, of animals, of human beings, that we completely missed actual fundamental ways that these things are in the world. Can you describe those different ways and what he thought about this?
Yes, our modern intellectual tradition is very good at some things. We're very good at mathematics. Mathematics are, as a field, is bound by ideas and theories, and ideas are connected rationally. We're getting very good at science, and the categories we have for understanding the natural world uncovered by the physical sciences are pretty good. But that basic arsenal of concepts and ideas doesn't translate very well into all sorts of other things. And Heidegger's genius was realizing this and recognizing that most of the everyday situations and everyday objects that we deal with are very poorly captured using the conceptual resources of the intellectual tradition. So that includes everyday objects, the objects we use. It includes works of art. Works of art can't be adequately treated as objects with properties. That doesn't begin to capture what they do to us and the role they play in our lives. These categories certainly can't begin to grasp what it is to be human and what it is to engage passionately in a world and to connect passionately with other people and to love and to hope and to dream and to aspire to things, all of the most important elements of human existence.
But the philosophical tradition probably would have just said, okay, well, an object has these properties, and also it has, because of these properties, it has this function, for example, and then it can also have this hold on us, and it might have this causal relationship between things. Instead, Heidegger said that you couldn't reduce the definition of something just to its properties in this way, right? There's can you say that there's completely separate but just as basic ways for things to show up? Maybe I'm making it more confused, but it seems like that's an important point.
Right. So when you're trying to explain these different kinds of things, there are a couple of strategies available to you. One is to dismiss them as unimportant. Our theories can't explain it, but that doesn't matter. That's not very important anyway. Another is to doggedly press ahead using the intellectual resources you have and insist that we're going to explain it. It'll take a while, but we can reduce love to brain chemistry or something like that. Someday we'll have a complete, adequate scientific theory of these things. Heidegger rejected both of those alternatives. And he said the very first thing we have to ask is, what kind of entities are these? He had a funny way of putting it. He'd say, what is their mode of being? What is their way of being? But behind that question was an openness to the possibility that not everything is the same, that there are distinct classes and types of things and beings in the world, entities in the world. And Heidegger gave a non-complete list, an incomplete list, but they included human being. To be human is to be different than a lump of matter. They included natural objects. He included equipment, tools, and argued that the everyday equipment and tools that we encounter in the world are not the same as just lumps of matter with some special properties added onto them. Heidegger thought life was a whole different way of being. He thought works of art was another different way of being in the world.
So let's take an example of equipment. How would the philosophical tradition describe an instrument, let's say that the carpenter used, or a hammer, or a saw, and what did Heidegger say that the philosophical tradition was missing, or could not get to the bottom of?
Yeah, especially in our modern scientific world, there's a tendency to begin with the assumption that the most basic truth of everything is reducible to its physical properties. And that's the way philosophers and scientists alike have proceeded. So they would take a tool, a hammer, or a plane, or a musical instrument, a drum, a guitar, and begin analyzing it in terms of the material properties that it has, its weight, its shape, its density, color, right? There's a whole list of material properties that you might focus on in understanding these objects. And so they'd construct it as a physical entity first. And then, of course, they'd say, well, there's another story to be told because it isn't just any old lump of matter. It's one that we use in everyday life. And so you could add to your account of this something like a use function or a use value. But there was a very conscious effort to be able to describe these things in a way that was continuous with the natural sciences, and where everything could be reduced to the kind of categories and the kind of concepts that we use in material science.
And instead, I just wanted, if you want to say what you said in the other interview, which is that if you wanted to understand a hammer, Heidegger said you can't understand it in these ways. You have to be able to see have the context of people hammering and nails and all that kind of stuff.
Right. So Heidegger, I think. So Heidegger understood that you could give an endless scientific description of things and still miss what they really were when you're talking about, say, everyday objects that we encounter. If you want to see what a hammer is for Heidegger, you don't describe its physical properties. you pick it up and start hammering with it. And without the skills for hammering, the hammer will never show itself as the thing that it really is. And that's a characteristic feature of all of the equipment and tools and all of the kinds of objects we encounter in our everyday lives.
And let's talk about how then our skills for dealing with these tools and these objects in the world open up, both inform who we are and what a world is. Could you explain, like, how does your relationship with the way you encounter the world, the way Heidegger described it, make you who you are, both in the general sense as people and maybe in the specific sense as having an identity, as a specific thing, like as a carpenter or as a musician or something like that, and then how does the world show up differently because of that?
Okay, by focusing on how things show up and asking this question, what are the conditions under which something can genuinely show itself, Heidegger was led to the importance of bodily skills. If an object only shows itself to someone who is genuinely skilled at using it, you can see this by watching a master of something. When a master craftsman picks up a tool, it suddenly has a sort of life to it that it didn't have when it's laying there on the bench. And Heidegger also understood that in an important sort of way, the object with properties disappears when it's being used by a master craftsman. So a tool isn't an object that the craftsman is focusing on. The tool is a way of getting access to the kind of things that the craftsman does. And for a very good craftsman, in a sense, the tool disappears, and all that's left are the possibilities opened up by use of the tool.
And the Japanese word for carpenter actually gets at the bottom of this in a really interesting way, right?
Yes, I think I'm not a Japanese scholar, but from what I understand of the meaning of the word carpenter tool in Japanese, it means literally way of the carpenter. And that's a very sensitive description of what a tool is. The tool isn't an instrument that you focus on. The tool is literally a way the carpenter has of engaging with the world and engaging with the workshop and the people and the things around him.
And somehow the carpenter is also not just the person who does this job or has these features or this schedule in his life, or there's something about his skills that makes him think of himself and see everyone else around him see him as a carpenter. Can you uncover that a little bit?
Yeah, right. So just as skills allow things to show themselves, they also allow a whole network and context of things show themselves. A whole meaningful set of relationships that things bear show up as a result of the skills that someone has. And, interestingly enough, the skills also allow people to show up and be the people that they are. So Heidegger thought each of these different kinds of entities had its own way of being. That meant each of them had different possibilities open to them. And what's unique about us, for Heidegger, is one of our possibilities is to open new possibilities and to inhabit the world in new and radically different ways. And so he saw that it was very important for human beings to take a stand on their way of being in the world. They couldn't, unlike animals and unlike physical objects, it's not programmed into them how they're going to engage with things. And there are all sorts of different ways that you can be a human being. Becoming skillful is a way of becoming someone different, in a sense, inhabiting the world differently and opening up the world differently.
So being a carpenter doesn't necessarily mean like deciding I'm going to be a carpenter, and the.
Well, I can say something about that. often when people hear
Hold on, hold on, don't forget.
What's up, baby? Huh? Are we here? Moses. Moses, you up there?
it might be Madeline. Madeline?
No, it's the collar of the dog.
Oh.
We're beings in the world. There's gonna be some noises, it's alright.
Does it drive you crazy to go to a movie and do you hear everything that they didn't manage to filter out?
They're very good.
Yeah, in the
Well,
movie you don't hear that.
Yeah, well, it's like, that's the whole thing. You're anal about everything, so that it's not there, and they add it. Or they won't let
So like in a bar, can you hear the clinking in the kitchen? And
That's added.
All that usually they'll make.
no,
sure
I
that
mean in
that-
real life. Does it drive you crazy to, say, be in a restaurant and hear all these noises in the background? No, you can shut that off when you're not working.
I think the sound people usually appreciate those noises, but they just want to be able to manipulate them and put them in where they're supposed to be. So, for example, Hiroshi, when we were filming him, the sound man loved the sounds of the tools and of the hand on the shirt and all this stuff. But you don't want those things while he's talking. You want to be able to have those things and layer it. You want it to be optimizable and efficient.
Mhm.
No, I'm just
Speaking of, let's roll.
okay.
Keep shooting.
So.
People often hear this idea of taking a stand on your being as involving a kind of deliberate decision, as if we all have to have this moment of existential doubt and say, oh, what should I be? Who should I be? And then you reach a decision. And it doesn't necessarily mean that. It's simply pointing to the fact that the future is open for us. Who we are is open. And no matter what we do as human beings, it represents living life in a way that we didn't have to.
So talk now. We've talked about the people who have these identities as carpenters or musicians or whatever. But what about the worlds that they inhabit? What is this way that Heidegger thought of these like local worlds? When I say world, most people say world, they might just think of our Earth and with a bunch of stuff in it and people in it. What was this notion of worlds to him?
Yeah. Another feature of the way we moderns tend to think about things is we want to begin from these basic components and then stick them all together and arrive at the totality as simply a collection of little tiny pieces. The idea of world in Heidegger is an attempt to combat that. Heidegger thought that there is something. Do I have to stop because then?
There's something in the plane.
There's something in the.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
The engine of a plane.
Can I start?
Yeah.
All right. In addition to all of the particular things surrounding us, there's a coherence to it. There's a organizing context to it, and that's something it's not a thing, but it's not simply represented when you list all the things in an environment. I think Heidegger says in a couple of places, very rarely, but I think it's a good way of talking about this. He describes a world as a style. So if you think of the difference between, say, the way the tools are set up in a hardware store, right, where they're just lined up and they're on the shelves and they're set up in a way that you can easily find them, but they're not organized in any particular kind of way. And if you then walk into the workshop of a craftsman, the tools aren't lined up the way they are lined up in a hardware store. They're organized and they're laid out in such a way that they're ready to be reached out and grabbed by the craftsman, and they're in the right place for the sort of tasks that they're typically used for. And each craftsman will have their own way of organizing them that's sensitive to the size of their body, but also the kind of skills they engage in, the kind of craft they engage in. And all of those things will come together and give an organization and a coherence to the workshop. Heidegger argued that the same thing is going on at the level of a world, and a world or a culture will have an overall style that dictates how things are organized, how things line up, where things go, what things are important, what things are unimportant. In the world of movie making, planes are important. He called it a style. Yeah, yeah, he does. I know you have, but you never read the Beiträge. That's brilliant. Yeah. Okay, where was I?
So you're explaining that a world. I would love you to say like that. Explain how the world of music has its own things showing up compared to the world of carpentry. To get away from only the carpenter example, like that these different local worlds have people show up differently, things show up differently, and they have their own internal logic, or however one would put that.
Okay.
I guess in the filmmaking world, these planes are showing up as really relevant.
They are,
And
yeah.
when we're not
That's right.
dwelling in the filmmaking world, they just completely
Mark, just take
disappear.
that tissue and wipe yourself in these two places in the middle of your forehead. That's where that always shows up. Perfect.
Literally, those things disappear for us usually.
Yeah, the planes.
The sounds of the planes and the track, I don't even hear them. And now that this is a great example of this because these things are showing up. Yeah, but that is not so bad over here. Yeah.
Now they're going, you got it all. The dogs,
Yeah,
and the plane.
And the computer and the. This is why you want to do this inside. What's that?